looks good. Hello everyone. Sorry for the bit of delay. Long live technology. So in front of you is standing a farmer's boy from a little village in the Netherlands, on an island to be exact. I've done a lot of open source, first as a hobby, early 2000s, and later it became my work, starting at SUSE Linux and later OwnCloud, now Nextcloud, where I'm head of marketing. And I live in Berlin in Germany, where I moved to, slightly bigger place than the village where I came from. And today I'm going to talk about a lot of aspects related to privacy, and these days that has a lot to do with computers and the cloud and all that stuff. So, well, it's kind of hot again with Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg getting grilled, or, well, however you consider grilling. Today I'll go over the good parts of the cloud and what we've gained in the last decade or so, and the slightly less good parts about it, as well as that privacy thing that I'll bring up quite a few times. I'll talk a little bit about what I think the direction is that solutions should take, and I'll present just one, although there's a whole host of ways to deal with this, both political and social. I'm trying to fill up the hour, but if you have questions, just ask them, like wave at me. I'm sure you'll get my attention at some point, and just ask. I'm happy to be interrupted. So, first part, let's start with the good parts of the cloud. I mean, I don't need to tell most of you, right? We have all these big companies who's been building all these cloud services for us that we're using every day. They're all very different companies, as this graphic suggests. But each in their own way, they've given us some pretty cool stuff, right? We have YouTube and Gmail, Dropbox, Tumblr. We put our data online and give it to them because it's great. I mean, a couple of days ago, I went with Frank to a Best Buy. And we were playing with like the Nest and the Alexa and the Siri, and well, only the Siri was turned on, and it was pretty cool. That, you know, you ask it to play Metallica and it does. I also tried something a little less well known. I asked for one of my favorite black metal bands, Limbonic Art. It instead decided to go for Simon and Garfunkel. I'm guessing my English wasn't good enough. Let's just stick with that. But point is, of course, it's really cool what they're building and what they continue to build, and it genuinely works. I mean, last week before I flew here via Seattle, my phone, which is an Android, gave me a notification and said, hey, how about I download the offline map of the Seattle area for you? They know I'm flying to Seattle, and you know, that's actually a very good idea to tell me that, because I did it, because it's useful and it helps me. And I'm sure all of you have similar experiences. Like a lot of this stuff, I mean, sometimes you don't need it, but sometimes you do. And yeah, if your phone breaks, you just get a new one, you log in with your same account, and it tells you again where you're going and, you know, what the services are available. I mean, this is genuinely awesome. And it's free, you know, mostly. Which, of course, gets us to another point. It's not really free, right? I mean, Google is reasonably rich. The fact that you guys aren't paying them doesn't mean they're not earning money on you. So, what's wrong? And that should make you ask questions. If something is free, why is it free? Now, with Dropbox, we kind of know the ones who pay for it are the ones who pay for the people who don't pay. It's kind of a model that I think a lot of us can accept to some degree. But with Google, we all know that that's not the case. Although you can pay for their services, a lot of people don't, and they still make a lot of money on you. So you should ask yourself, where is my data? Who can access it? And how is it used? Now, the first one, of course, the answer is simple. It's in the cloud, and I'll give you a minute to read this other X-Cassidy comic. I mean, what is the cloud, right? It's this huge amorphous network of servers somewhere, and everybody buys server time from everyone else, getting it in one place. Right. So your files are in the cloud, and whether they are indeed on that box there or somewhere else, it doesn't really matter too much. In the end, you should be asking who has access to it. Now, so these guys have it in their clouds, wherever they are, big data centers in various locations, you know, from Ireland and Iceland to various places here in the US and Asia. And of course, you know, they have to work under the jurisdiction of the countries where they're in, obviously. So they hand over their data, at least to the governments in the countries where they are. And that goes beyond the governments, the people in that country specifically. So Microsoft has on their website a nice section where they explain who has access to your data. And that's only Microsoft employees. Unless legally they have to hand it over to the government, then they do. But they will tell you if they do, unless they're legally prohibited from doing so. In other words, that's of course always the case. Now in the US you have a pretty well functioning legal system, so they can fight these requests in court, and sometimes then that becomes public. US judges have requested data from Americans and perhaps non-Americans in Iris that was situated in Iris data center, and Microsoft fought that. They said, look, the data isn't in the US, so you know, you shouldn't have access to it. You can't just ask us to deliver you data wherever it is, right? There are European laws and Chinese laws and, you know, laws all over the world. And they recently gave up the fight after the Cloud Act was passed as part of a spending bill. They were like, okay, so it is now legal to demand data wherever it is. But at least you all know about it, that wherever your data is, anywhere in the world, if Microsoft has access to it, so does your government. And I can imagine that's not a terribly scary prospect. But, you know, if a country allows businesses to operate in that country, but only if they operate under the law of that country. That's also true in China. It's also true in Russia and Germany and, you know, South Africa. So if Microsoft wants to do business in those countries, and the law in those countries said that whenever the government asks for data of any user, wherever that user is, anywhere in the world, and by the way, you can't tell anyone about it, I'm guessing they comply, at least they say so on the website. So, I don't know, it's not hard to argue that perhaps every intelligence agency has access to anyone's data. And if they do, we wouldn't know. Because, well, they have to follow the laws in every country, right? I think Google is the only company that doesn't do business in China, interestingly. But the others do. Again, should you worry? I mean, look, this is government agencies. I mean, they are spying and they're fighting each other, and, you know, let them do it. That's politics, right? We don't really care perhaps too much about that, and that's fair enough. But they're also taking action. 2 years ago, Dropbox started deleting copyrighted content. So if you had a movie that you had illegally downloaded somewhere and you had it on Dropbox, they would run checks against the files you had. They would probably just look at hashes of the files. They wouldn't, they would that way detect that you had copyright content. They would delete it. Now, fair enough. I mean, it's not nice maybe that they're looking at your files, but they're doing it indirectly. And, you know, copyright content, well, that is a violation of the law. You shouldn't be doing that. Fair enough. All right. So last year, Google started to delete porn on Google Drive. You can say, okay, well, first of all, that was probably also copyrighted. And second of all, who cares? But it was a little more interesting, that case, actually, because that porn wasn't copyrighted content that was shared widely. It was actually from individual porn actors who created it specifically for specific customers. Yeah? So this was business, which at least in some jurisdictions is legitimate, that was just made impossible on Google's infrastructure. So that's, I think, already getting quite a step further, right? They were automatically looking at files and determining that something was porn, whether they had ever seen it before or not, and then blocking or deleting it. And starting May 1st, Microsoft has a new policy. They're going to ban offensive language and inappropriate content whatever that is, to their definition, from Skype, Office, Xbox, and basically any other platform. Now, I don't know really what's going to happen on May 1st, but from this it can be pretty much anything. I mean, what? We're going to beep out any bad words from any Skype conversation you're having? Are they going to delete any files that they don't like in China because the government doesn't want you to talk about Tiananmen Square? We don't really know, but the fact is that they have access to your data and they can do anything with it, and they're just putting policies in place in these, you know, click-through end-use license agreements that you never read, that allow them, even legally, to do anything, and you will have to accept that, because after all, it's their infrastructure that you put in your data, and you're probably not even paying for it. So, why does it matter? I mean, a lot of people say, look, I have nothing to hide, which is, of course, a beautiful argument that comes up a lot. So I want to talk a little bit about this thing called privacy. Yeah, why is it important? I'm going to start with, what do you have to hide? The thing is, first of all, you don't know what you have to hide. There's a lot more than you think. And besides, I think it's actually healthy to have something to hide. That's normal. We're a democracy, still. And in a democracy, you need to have healthy discourse, you need to have disagreement. And let's be honest, every change in the last few hundred years that happened to the laws in any country usually was preceded by a lot of people actually breaking that law until it was changed. It wouldn't have changed if there was perfect law enforcement. I'll get a bit to that later, but that's, I think, something important. And the last point is that privacy is a basic human need. It's something you all need. It's more important for you than you just would think if you don't think too deep about it. So let's go to first things. So apparently in the US, I haven't counted, but there are apparently 27,000 pages of federal statutes, around 4,500 laws, and 10,000 administrative. Yes?
Actually, I think the correct answer is nobody knows.
Even
there
better.
Studies attempting to find out how big the code is and nobody knows. It tells you something about the legal system.
Exactly. So apparently, possessing a live lobster is illegal in some states. Okay, you might not be walking around with a live lobster over the street very often, but it's still a rather odd thing that you probably didn't know. And in Washington, I think it was not Washington State, but Washington, DC, it's illegal to be smelly. Which again, is probably not something most people are aware of, and I'm sure if you've put on too much deodorant or perfume, they won't pick you up for that. But it is one of these little rules that's being used by police in a discretionary way. So, as an example, if a bunch of, you know, young people is hanging out downside your apartment condo in the middle of the night and making a lot of noise, and the police has to remove them, they have to use some rule or law. And they can always find something. They're loitering, they're jaywalking, they're being smelly, or drinking in public, right? I mean, normally if you jaywalk, you don't immediately get a fine. I mean, that would probably cost us all a lot of money if that was the case. And the same goes for any of these other things. It's just, you use these as a cop when it's kind of appropriate and you need to do something, but you don't really have anything else. And that sounds maybe a bit evil, but it's quite okay. I mean, it's sometimes abused maybe, but that's usually in little ways. And it's sometimes used disproportionately, of course, against certain groups of people. But by and large, it's not necessarily a bad thing. But it becomes a bad thing, of course, if the government always knows everything about you. If they can make a list of every time you jaywalked and crossed over a field of grass where you weren't supposed to walk, and every other little thing that you did wrong in the last decade, well, they could probably use that. Now, again, maybe they don't have anything against any of you, but maybe you're a journalist, maybe you're a member of a grassroots political organization, maybe you're active in a local charity that tries to, you know, protest a local cause. And then suddenly there is an incentive to use this stuff against you, and they can. And I'm not even talking about just releasing information about you that's, you know, embarrassing. So there are a lot of ways these things can be abused against you. Yeah. And
yeah, I
yeah.
sometimes say that we don't want to give the next J. or Hoover the tools to stop the next Martin Luther King.
Exactly. It's also about change. Like over time, the rules and norms change. I mean, it was illegal to be gay in a lot of countries 100 years ago, and today it's legal. But some things go the other way around. Yeah, maybe, you know, beating up gay people was actually not frowned upon at all 100 years ago, and it is today, which is, I think, a good thing. But there are also many things that used to be totally okay and are not today. And in history, there have been some scary examples. I mean, I'm Dutch, and in the Netherlands, in World War II, the largest number of Jews was deported by the Nazis from any other country in Europe. That was because we Dutch were actually registering whether people were Jew or not, and the only thing that the Nazis had to do was go to the local governments, ask for a list of all the Jews, and then keep looking until they found them. It's pretty hard to hide people when they know exactly how many people there are supposed to be, what their names are, and where they used to live. And of course, there was nothing problematic about that information until 1940, and suddenly, you know, it was dangerous to be a Jew. And these things can change too, right? I mean, at the moment, it's legal to be, I don't know, libertarian or mention any political or social, you know, property, but that can change, and that change can sometimes come faster than you think. So, again, you probably have things to hide. That's my point here, more than you realize or think about in a normal day. And it goes further. I mean, first of all, no government is perfect. I think, especially in the US, I think I'll find that everyone agrees with that. In other countries, people are perhaps less critical of the government. But the thing is, think of every religion. I mean, think of Galileo and the church who did not want him to talk about the things that he was talking about. The civil dissidents and Jim Crow movement. King George and USA independence. I mean, you guys did something really illegal. Did you know that back in the day? You know, if there was perfect law enforcement, you'd all still be British. Yeah. So there is an argument for being able to do illegal things to a certain degree. Yeah. Society doesn't fall apart because a small group of people thinks that, you know, something shouldn't be illegal and needs to be changed. Yeah, I mean, the whole reason we're having a lot of these conversations is because of Edward Snowden. And technically, of course, what he did, you can say what you like about him, but it was illegal. And yet, I think a lot of people argue that the fact that he did it was a good thing in many ways for a lot of people. So, you know, if government knew everything about you, they could stop improvements, change in general. Yeah, we wouldn't be as free as we are. So as a society, you need to be able to do bad stuff. I mean, activism is a big example. I mean, you know, chaining yourself to a tree to protect it, it's probably technically not legal, and they could even make it very illegal, but it's still, I think, something people need to be able to do. Whether you agree that the tree should stay there or not, right? It's people's right to protest. So you should probably ask yourself what comes next, right? What is the next thing that right now is illegal but maybe shouldn't be? Or the other way around, something that's legal and maybe shouldn't be. So the last point is a bit personal for me. I am a psychologist, but I've also needed one in the past. How many of you have gone to a psychologist because you had, well, issues? It's brave. A lot of people aren't really open to admit that. And that's of course because we care about what other people think about us. I'm sure there are a few more hands here that could have gone up and didn't. Yeah? I mean, think, why would you not tell someone that you, well, had a bad time? Yeah? You don't want to look weak. That's normal, it's healthy. I mean, everybody cares about the impression they make on others. That's why you take a shower. That's why you use makeup and perfume. And I mean, let's just say Facebook. right? I mean, you show the pictures of the party, but not the hangover the next morning, to give a very simple example. Yeah, we're all trying to create an impression for other people to see. We're very happy to be able to dictate how other people see us. It's important for us. Yeah, you're different in different settings. I mean, you know, when you're dating, obviously, you want to look like a good potential boyfriend or girlfriend, or maybe even husband or wife. You want to be like that funny guy at the party. You want to be a good employee for your boss. But these are all kind of personas that you create, and they're different, right? You can be both the funny guy and really serious at work, and really sweet at home to your family. This is important for us, right? As human beings, to be able to portray ourselves the way we want to be seen. But that requires privacy, because if all of that, these walls fall down, we kind of lose a little piece of ourselves. Now, what's happening in China, I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but the Chinese government is kind of experimenting on a pretty epic scale with, well, it's often called gamification, I guess. It's basically creating a Facebook for how good a citizen you are. Your thumbs up and thumbs down actually matter, whether you can actually take a flight or buy a house, get a job. Yeah? So they're creating a situation where there's always social pressure, and this is already a problem. You hear this from a lot of teenagers in our society, that, you know, there's always a camera on them, and at every point, anything they do can be put on Facebook. And honestly, I don't want to know what it would have done to my career and everything else if everything I did as a kid could be on Facebook. Seriously, I don't know how they survive. I mean, I've done plenty of stuff that I, even though I'm pretty open usually, would not happily talk about in a big group like this, let alone just have out on the internet. And I think that goes for most of us who are old enough to not have grown up with Facebook and pictures taken everywhere. This changes the way people act. You essentially always have to keep up a mask, you have to be careful. And that changes our whole behavior, our whole society. You will always have this pressure to conform, to fulfill like the social norms that are around you. But that's not healthy, not on a personal, psychological level, and also not as a society. Yeah, so the problems with privacy go beyond just, you know, politics or money or capitalism. It's something that changes us as human beings. I mean, sure, it's good that we've all been covered by this layer of culture that protects other people around us, right? We're all become a lot nicer than we were 10,000 years ago, generally speaking, and a lot of that is good. But a lot of it also results in a lot of repressed, you know, feelings. I mean, this is where psychology came from, right? When Freud discovered that in the Vienna housewife scene there were a whole lot of suppressed sexual feelings. That's what kind of kicked off this whole field. But we all have, of course, a lot of repressed feelings, and to some degree that's okay, and that's why you have soccer and, you know, drinking and all that stuff and parties, and that's fine. That's how we deal with it, but it's getting really more and more these days, and the whole internet makes it worse. And again, that's okay until you get to who controls this. Yes?
Do you have a way to measure or think about that claim? In other words, like if the claim is that it is becoming worse and it is becoming more monitored and worse, is that measured by the number of people online, or is that measured by, again,
suicides among teenagers? Suicides among teenagers. I mean, 7-year-olds having headaches. I mean, because of stress.
Child health is...
That's definitely a part of it. Yeah, child mental health in general, right? I mean, we have a mental health epidemic in the Western world. And I mean, there were problems always, right? There's always been a lot of stress. It's just a few hundred years ago, it was about whether you could get enough food. And now it's about whether you get, you know, approval from your social peers. It's different. And, you know, we've improved a lot in society in general. You don't have to worry about food anymore or shelter. At least most people don't. A lot of people still do. But a lot of people don't. And yet, we're more stressed and working harder than we ever did, which is kind of odd, right? And that the whole digitalization plays a role in that. And the thing where I wanted to go to is this is a general societal problem, but it's also something that can be used and weaponized against us. And that's, of course, what the Chinese government is doing to some degree. And that's also something that can, to some degree, will happen here. I mean, fake news and checking what the right thing to say is on Facebook. I think we all agree there are issues in press and with, fake news, whatever it is. But the fact that Facebook is now going to determine what is real and what isn't is kind of scary. Also because, again, as a psychologist, which is what I studied, you know what the factor is that makes people, that influence people most. I mean, advertisements. We all know, okay, advertisements influence you. If you see that McDonald's sign every day, it will make you eat at McDonald's a little more often. But if you're gluten intolerant, you're not gonna eat burgers, at least not the bread. The effect of advertisement is limited in some ways. You know what the strongest factor is on people, like what influences them most? It's what their families and friends think. And how do you these days experience and notice, conscious and subconscious, what your family and your friends think and do? Through Facebook. So they control the most emotionally powerful way of changing your opinions. I mean, you think your opinions on politics are shaped by your logical thinking and facts that you've learned. Well, statistically and psychologically speaking, it's much easier to predict somebody's political opinions based on what their friends and their family think than based on anything they've read, experienced, or seen. Yeah. So this is an incredible power. I mean, we've seen, of course, and extensively discussed what happened in the elections last year. But at the moment, we all still think that at least this was a outside party, maybe British, maybe American, etc., who was trying to influence the elections. But what if Facebook has an incentive to actually do so? I mean, it's funny because I've been given variants of this presentation for a long time, and I've always been saying, what if Facebook would change your timeline? The algorithms that build it, I mean, none of you know how this works, neither do I. Nobody really knows how they determine what is the top item. It's the same with Twitter, what did you miss? How does Twitter determine what you missed? How can they know that? Well, that's of course algorithms that take all kinds of inputs. I mean, how does Google know what to put on top when you search for something? Right? There's no control over this, and they can change these rules anytime, and they do. And if they would simply change these rules a little bit to be more positive about one political party and more negative about another, or to support conspiracy theories. I mean, again, 2 years ago, this conversation was hypothetical. That's no longer the case. We know that at least stuff like this happened, whether Facebook actually participated in it or not. It didn't even need to. It was just a matter of throwing money at it. And they earned money on it, so they don't care. So, okay, you have, or you should have, and you need something to hide. Privacy is getting eroded, so who gets hurt? Now, fundamentally, that's normal people like you and me. Because defense contractors and oil companies and, big arms and drug traffickers, terrorists, they don't have a problem with this. Because first of all, they have something to hide and they bloody well know it. So they make sure that they invest in the right security technology. And that's a problem. Because governments, have always been very good at secrecy. Without press and investigative journalism, our democracy wouldn't function. And we all know how much the press is under attack, both directly and simply because their business model doesn't really work anymore, because we don't want to pay for news anymore. That's a problem, because they are enforcing transparency. And the thing is, individuals should have privacy, But companies and obviously terrorists and other organizations, they actually shouldn't. And this is turning around. Yeah, I mean, if a whistleblower can't count on not being outed or not being punished, they're not going to blow the whistle. And that's a huge problem for our society, because there's bad stuff happening all the time. Yeah, so I already mentioned, if you're an annoying local journalist or local charity, it's not that hard for a government organization, in theory at least, to use what they know about you to stop you from doing what is annoying them. Yeah. And it's not only evil government, right? I mean, a couple of years ago in Mexico, a Twitter account was sending tweets about violence from the local mob. So whenever there was a lot of people getting shot, there would be pictures showing up, and people were warned to stay inside or, you know, be careful. And at some point, that Twitter account stopped tweeting. Everybody was speculating what happened, and a week later, a picture of a severed head, I'm not kidding, showed up. That was the doctor who was running the Twitter account, and they had found her. This stuff happens, yeah. So what do we do? I'm hoping I've convinced most of you there's something to be done about. So let's talk about what we can do. I mean, we vary in age here in the room, but for me, early 2000s, when the internet really became a thing, and I was studying, and you know, I saw this internet, and I started to hang out on forums and talk to people online, I was really optimistic. I really thought, wow, this is going to change everything, you know? In 10 years, you know, the newspapers aren't really going to be important anymore. I thought it was a good thing at the time. I've changed my mind. And I thought, you know, people are going to get the real news directly from other people. Now, the internet is going to help. Everybody's going to be able to, I don't know, run their own server maybe, you know, share their own information with others, be in control. That's not really what happened, right? First of all, the internet, which was designed to be decentralized, and really everybody would be serving and sharing their own data. If you now remove Facebook, Google, and Microsoft, 90% of the internet goes down, right? That's not decentralized at all. It's all in a few places. That's not good, right? That puts these in enormously powerful situations. So, you know, this is one of the things we need to take away. We need to start moving our data out of these few huge companies and moving it to better places. And there is now a delete Facebook hashtag on Twitter, ironically. But of course, where to is still a question a lot of people ask, because you don't really see a lot of alternatives, and it's hard to build an alternative to something. I mean, I can definitely remove Google from my phone, but there's no other service that's going to tell me, hey, you're going to Seattle next week, do you want to download the map locally offline? And there aren't real good alternatives at the moment, at least not for the whole breadth of services that they're developing. I mean, it's not a surprise, these companies have billions, and while I personally think they could do a whole lot more with the money they have, they're at least doing something. So we need to go back a little bit to the early days of the internet one way or another. We need to build infrastructure for that. Everybody needs their own server, or we need BitTorrent-like protocols that share, but at least it needs to be in control of normal people. And I think open source, I mean, that should be easy to argue at a Linux conference. Open source should be a big part of that, because in the end you don't have true control over something if it isn't open source. I mean, I know Apple is really good at keeping data of people safe. They even go so far that it's sometimes hampering their technology and the usability of their stuff, which is, you know, I applaud them for that. But if the NSA would force them to upload an update to your iPhone that sends all the data to the NSA servers, there's absolutely nothing you can do, and you would never know it. And this might already be happening with the phones from certain people. That they want to spy on and follow, that's a problem. Right? And I know Android isn't much better, and that's also again because of centralization and how it's developed. But these are things we need to work on together. And again, we're at a place where this happens. A lot of people here are active in open source projects, work on open source things, and try to work on these. And So we need to get control over, locations of data, and who has access to it, and who can control it, and well, monetize it, of course. And it needs to be secure. As I said, open source. We need to, be able to trust it. I mean, I know not all of you are gonna check the code, right, that runs on your phone. And it's not necessary, as long as some people do, and as long as there's an incentive to do it. And well, just being public, I mean, it's a reason why a lot of companies really hate open sourcing their code. Even though if they are violating licenses, I mean, there have been some other talks about that. There's always, it's really difficult to get them to open the code. Why? Well, management doesn't really trust the engineers that have been working on the code. They don't know what the guys did, or the girls, of course. If you don't even trust your own engineers, how can we trust you as a company? But we all do. We buy their products and use them. And it needs to be easy to use, because again, I get notified that there's a map to be downloaded, and having to do it manually is simply not the same. Yes, I can use OpenStreetMap, but then I will have to figure out myself that I need to download that map. And if I'm in the plane at, well, pretty high up there, and I think, oh shit, I forgot to download that, then it's too late. So we really need solutions that are as good, and that's, I think, probably our biggest challenge, because we're not there yet, not in any area, pretty much. Yeah. I'm gonna skip this because I think we're already getting to the end of my time, right? I mean, I don't want to.
You can probably go over a little bit.
Okay, but I don't think I need to convince all of you still that decentralization protects, so let me move on. There's one point I want to make before I move on this, and this keeps coming up again. Yeah, the police should have a backdoor. I've addressed it a few times, but the thing is, it's been likened to suggesting not to lock our doors so that if there's a burglary in process, the police can come in easier to help you. I mean, it's clear if you put it like that it's a bogus argument. The fact is simply, if you make a backdoor in our technology, that backdoor doesn't discriminate from the good and the bad guys, and even worse, from the good or bad intentions of supposedly good or bad guys. Right, this backdoor can and will be abused by anyone. This has happened in the past, and it will happen again. So we have one infrastructure on Earth that we're building. Yeah, you can't create a world in which the US can spy, but the Chinese can't. Yeah, in which governments can look at data, but criminal organizations can't. This is just fundamentally, technically not possible. And whenever it's been tried in the past, it failed massively. An example is Greece, where the telephone system needed to have a backdoor that was only accessible by police. And at some point, in a couple of really big criminal cases, judges started to die. The criminal organization, being that the police was going after, had figured out how to get in that telephone system and was figuring out what the judges were saying and just removed the ones that weren't favorable to them. It has gone wrong in a pretty epic way there, and it will go wrong just like that or in a different way again. That's just guaranteed. So, we need to find a balance in privacy and law enforcement. I don't deny that it's important for law enforcement to have some kind of access to our technology. But the way law enforcement is trying to do it these days is just, it's not effective. Yeah? In 1994, in Berlin, where I live, there was a total of 919 telephone taps done. So the police asked to be able to listen in on a telephone. Now 4.2 million people in Berlin. Maybe a bit less in 1994. But 900 taps, 4 million people. I as a citizen don't really need to worry about that, right? That's clearly targeted. You can't argue that they're just blanket checking everyone when you're talking about 1,000 on 4 million people. It's been 5 years ago, I don't have an exact date for it, but there was a string of car fires in Berlin 5 or 6 years ago. So they tried to find the person who did it. And to be able to do that, they tapped 4.2 million telephones. That's everyone. Yeah? To go after one person who was just burning cars. That's not targeted at all, right? So, and this is just one example, but this is of course the same thing as what the NSA is doing with hoovering up everybody's data, and working around all kinds of limitations you put on them. How these agencies work around the limitations is a whole story in itself. The Dutch one is kind of funny. The Dutch Secret Service is not allowed to just blanket hoover up and then look at the data. Well, they can actually hoover it up, but if they want to look at the data of an individual, they need to get permission from a judge. But not if they get that information from an ally, interestingly. So what they do is they give all the data to the allies, and whenever they need it, they just ask them for it. No judge needed. I'm not kidding, this is what they do. It's unbelievable. So,
I've got a question here.
yeah.
One of the other sides of the privacy is what happens if you forget your password and need to recover an account or something like that. And the problem is, if you have a means of doing that, then it can be done by
Abused.
somebody else. So
Yes.
has that gotten worse or stable over the years?
Well, I think there's been improvement in the technology that helps protect your accounts, right? You have two-factor authentication, and there are improvements in that area. And luckily, after a string of public scandals, companies have become a little bit more careful about the information they give out. There has been, of course, some examples where somebody tried to get somebody else's account. They would first call the help desk and say, I forgot the login. Then they would call and ask, I forgot the password. Tricks like that, or I call and forgot the phone number, or they call just as many times until they get the secret question right. This kind of stuff is getting better. But of course, in that case, you're still having all your data in one place. And I think we've learned enough, technologically speaking, that I think we can these days do a better job just not relying on a few big services. We just need to build the infrastructure for it, or keep building it. And I think most of you are hopefully convinced. I mean, cloud is awesome, you already knew that. You probably already knew that it endangers privacy, and I hope I've convinced you why that matters. But of course we need solutions. Now again, I've already said there's a whole bunch of them, and a big part of the solution here needs to be political. There are organizations like the Electronic Frontier Foundation and others that are fighting a political fight. Now I'm a techie, and that's where my interest, knowledge, focus is. So I'm going to talk about a technical solution that we've been developing for quite a while, and that's Nextcloud. And again, I want to emphasize, it's just one solution to the problem, but it's, I think, a good one. An important part of it, let me put it that way. It's about owning your data and knowing where it is, and this is what Nextcloud does, right? It's a file sync and share technology, as in you put your data on it, and it on a server that you own at home, or maybe at a provider that you trust. At which point, as a lot of people say, well, but if I put my data at a provider, we're still relying on someone. That's true, but it's much better to rely on thousands, tens of thousands of different local providers than having it all at one big company, right? This is why you already do a big step forward, I think, even if you don't host yourself, because I can imagine that's hard. Gave a workshop yesterday about it, but still, not everybody, of course, knows how to run a server, and I mean, that's, I think, a healthy thing, to be honest. It's not easy. So, what we've built with Nextcloud is a technology that lets you host your own data, not just your files, also your calendars, your contacts, music, and lots of other stuff, and access it via your mobile phone, via your browser, share with other people, and do a lot of the things, again, not all, but a lot of the things that you used to from the big players like Google and Dropbox and Apple and Microsoft. We already have tens of millions of users, so this is working. and the product is improving quick, and obviously we're looking for help. And I think this is an important direction for a solution here. Now, how much more time do I have? Because I also want to leave time for questions. 10:45. Okay.
5-7 minutes.
All right.
Presenter more time.
Okay, now, before I continue, because I'm going to talk a bit more about Nextcloud, show you what it can and can't do, but I want to urge all of you to ask questions if you have them now. So, yes.
So you mentioned the doctor in Mexico who was killed because she was warning people. And I see the emphasis on decentralization. Is there a way, or through an emergent technology or something else, where we can take the broadcasting of information, publishing a website, and decentralize it more in a way that's accessible for people, like not through Tor, so that it's not that doctor's IP address and gives an address for someone to come and take her out. There's not one place that an Edward Snowden has, it's not a bottleneck. It doesn't point to that one person. You can spread it out, and you had information for everyone. I think that would be a good step to more whistleblowers, more people less afraid to come forward with information that helps others. So, are there any emerging technologies that might help make this happen? So it's just like imagine nodes on Nextcloud. You help share a particular blog, and so maybe it's served from hundreds of different locations rather than
Just one. Yeah, I believe there is a tech that's, I don't know the name, but that does something similar like that. The problem is the usability of that, and the performance are often bad. Like the main problem, I think, and the main property, maybe I didn't hammer on this enough, but if we want to build a replacement for the technologies, I said a few times, it needs to be good. Maybe not perfect, maybe not be as good, but it needs to get very close. And a big element of that is being easy to use. A lot of technologies are hard to use, and I think the Tor project is doing a really good job at making things easy to use, right? You can just install an app on your phone, and suddenly you browse via Tor. You can actually run a Nextcloud server, give it a Tor address, and access it whenever you are. So, but the ease of use is really a challenge with a lot of these technologies. So, yeah. But Tor would actually, I think, be a good way for that, right? There are lots of...
just the barrier of regular people.
Exactly, yes. But there are web portals to go through Tor, and I think Tor is one of the things that as a community we need to put effort in, because it's a prime way of protecting people's privacy. Yes?
I've heard Tor's been compromised.
Yeah. The thing is with Tor, if you control enough nodes that, where data goes out to the internet and comes back in, you can start to infer things about the traffic that's happening, and sometimes you can track people. I mean, some of the people that were caught in the last years were using Tor. Now, first of all, of course, Tor is not solving all your problems. I mean, there's a reason why if you use a Tor browser, it resizes itself every time you start it, because just the size of your browser already gives a hint as to who you are. And that goes for pretty much every other property of your computer that can be gathered via it. So Tor is, I think, a tool that's not perfect. I don't believe that the core Tor technology has been broken. But then again, I don't have any proof either way. I don't think so. And especially if you stay within the Tor network, you don't go out, I think they will have a very hard time tracking you. I mean, Tor is pretty solid from a design and implementation perspective. Nothing's perfect, and I mean, secret agents have been trying to compromise like encryption algorithms before they were even standardized and stuff like that. But with most securities, most security technologies, what encryption experts often say, if they try to hack a system and you look at it and you see the encryption part, you can ignore Because AES 256, for example, that's secure. That's not the part that's hacked. It's usually the stuff around it that gets hacked. It's the people who make mistakes. It's the applications they use. It's their telephone, and not the secure connection itself. I mean, there's a nice escasity of it, where basically, you know, a cryptography fan might say, okay, I put AES 4000 something on my files. Nobody's gonna hack him, and the NSA guy gives a wrench to one of their employees and said, beat him until he gives you the password. That's, you know, in reality how it often goes. Yeah.
There's a good way of thinking about this, which is the question is, what's the budget of the person who is trying to attack you?
Yes.
Okay, and for all of us in this room, probably the budget is very low. In other words, you know, nobody's going to bother looking at Tor traffic or anything like that. But if your budget is, let's say, $10,000, what would you do? Easy, hire a local crook to break into your house and install a keylogger.
And done. Yeah. It's all in the end. If you're trying to protect yourself, you need to always look at, like, what are you trying to protect yourself from? Now, I don't think any of us here in the room can protect ourselves from a state attacker. Right? If the NSA really wants our data of any of us specifically, they're going to get your data. And I don't think that's really that bad, to be honest, because again, I do believe that it's good for police to be able to enforce laws. Just not blanket over all of us all the time perfectly. Because then we get back to, there shouldn't be perfect law enforcement. It should be law enforcement that is enough to make sure that our society doesn't fall apart, because everybody can just do whatever the heck they want. That's good. There shouldn't be a law enforcement that catches you whenever you jaywalk or do something even small wrong. It shouldn't be blanket, and we should all use protection that's good enough, so that it is very expensive for government to track everyone. I mean, a lot of you are probably aware of the Let's Encrypt project, which is basically trying to make the barrier to encrypting the traffic from a website with HTTPS really low. Like, their whole purpose was to let everybody encrypt their website. Even if you're just writing a blog about cooking, with Let's Encrypt, it is so easy to encrypt that most people do it. What is the benefit? I mean, do you need to protect your cooking blog? No, you don't. But what it does is it makes the price for anybody who's trying to just vacuum up all the traffic on the internet incredibly high. So the traffic that should be encrypted, like private images that you're sharing with your spouse that just shouldn't end up in the vacuum of the NSA, and decrypting that, figuring out whether it's that cooking blog or actually the pictures that maybe you want to use against somebody someday, it becomes really expensive. And that's the benefit. So if we'd all put in some effort to occasionally use Tor, or use something like Nextcloud and use Signal for chat. I mean, do you need to use Signal just because your chats are so incredibly valuable? No, not really. But the fact that you use Signal and you and you and you means that if there's one person in this room who uses Signal for a really good reason, because he or she is a journalist and trying to send sensitive information around, it becomes much harder for a Secret Service to pick out that specific person because of all these, cat pictures being shared in between over Signal. If you can't find like the important stuff between the cat pictures, we've actually done our job, because we made it harder to just blanket, track everyone. And that's, I think, what we need to do.
In terms of how interesting each person's traffic is too, it doesn't really matter if you're doing something illegal. If a company can sell you something, then your traffic becomes interesting to them as well, because they can profile you for advertisement.
True, but the amount of money they can make on you is of course always limited, right? So there's a limit to how much they'd be willing to pay to track you. It's surprisingly much, by the way. I think it's more than $1,000 that is earned on every individual by Google, for example. It's a lot of money that you're essentially paying.
Last quarter for every person in the United States.
Sorry?
I remember London doing a statistic about it where it was like $80 for every person in the United States per quarter.
Per quarter, okay, so it's quite a bit less than 1,000 then, but still.
That's a lot.
That's good money. A lot of people in the US. All right,
Call it now, I'm sorry.
we'll call it a day. Hey, thank you all.